it's a cliche to say that our guest doesn't require an introduction. Sometimes the cliche happens to apply. Safaricom is a name that if you have any interest in Africa, you will have come across, and if you have not, you're doing something wrong. Safaricom, of course, is world famous for its mobile money platform M-Pesa, which has been one of the runaway success stories of the last decade or so, and a flag bearer, a standard bearer for what Africa can do when it gets it right. Apart from being in business, apart from being a CEO, Bob has a wide range of interests in the bigger picture around development and sustainability in Africa. He sits on the Global Commission on Business and Sustainable Development. He's a member of the B Team, along with the likes of Richard Branson. He's on the board of the Global Compact. He's a member of Global Goals, a commissioner for Global Commission for Business and Sustainable Development, a board member at Acumen, and he serves as commissioner.
Enough already.
Yes. So there's more to it. It's not just about the bottom line. And that's very important in the context of talking about a company like Safaricom and products like M-Pesa, because they have demonstrated not only the commercial potential, but also the potential for impact, societal impact and development impact. We'll get into that later, but Bob, I'd like to start with, in keeping with the theme of today's conference, Made in Africa. In many ways, there is no better example than mobile money, than M-Pesa, than the experience that Safaricom has had and that Kenya has had over the last 10 or 15 years, which has really revolutionized a lot of daily life in Kenya, the economy in Kenya. When we talk of Made in Africa, what does that mean to you? Like, how would you characterize Made in Africa?
Well, the interesting thing about M-Pesa is that it wasn't actually invented in Kenya. It was invented actually here in London. But Made in Africa is about finding that, getting an understanding of what the challenges are. You know, a lot of people, even today, I mean, many people say, you know, why did M-Pesa not work in other countries? Because people were trying to take a solution and find a problem for it. The reason why M-Pesa worked in Kenya is because we understood the problem. We understood the challenges. The challenge was, how do you get money from the urban district to the rural districts? It's the characteristics of Kenyans that they want to send money home. And we took a piece of technology, and actually the technology is not that smart. You know, it operates in many other countries. And we said, here's a problem. How can we use this technology? How can we customize it to address that issue? But we've gone beyond just sending money home, and you know, all the statistics around what percentage of the country's GDP goes through the system. None of that really matters as much as some of the applications. And so we pick some applications at random. We have some of the largest, not some of, we have the largest refugee camp in the world, in Dadaab. It houses about 350,000 refugees. One of the challenges of trying to deliver food aid to that camp by the World Food Program is, first of all, you have to buy the food, and inevitably you buy the food from maybe Europe or maybe the US. You fly it, you then drive it. And in the middle of that all, there's a thing called the middleman. And you know, where I probably disagree with the chairman just now. He says energy is the biggest cost of doing business in Africa. Of course it's not. The biggest cost of doing business in Africa is corruption. And so by the time that food gets there, it would have been corrupted in many, many ways. And you know, Fatima, let's call her Fatima, then has to queue for the food, and she gets whatever is given to her. And we said, so what can we do with this thing called M-Pesa? And we have developed a product which we call Chakula Chap Chap. And Chakula Chap Chap simply digitizes it. It delivers the food aid onto her handset. And that electronic voucher then is used in the local duka, in the local shop. And there's a few things just happen there. The first thing is we saved the World Food Program a whole ton of money. The second thing is we have created more business for the local duka. The third thing is that we've gotten rid of corruption, And the final thing, which in our view is the most important part, is we've done something which is incredible. And that is that we have restored dignity to Fatima. Fatima no longer has to queue for food, because we fundamentally believe that no child should have to see its parent beg for food. And so that's what we think finding a solution. You know, the World Food Programme have got a solution, which is to get an airplane and to get a bus and to get everything else. And we found an African solution. And I can give you lots and lots more examples.
You see, it's interesting that you say most importantly, okay, so we got the business end of it right, we got the technology right, but most importantly, we did something for someone. We restored dignity, right? And this is reflective of a narrative that has gained a lot of traction in recent years. The idea that being in business doesn't mean you're not interested in society. It doesn't mean that you don't care about society. And it seems that at times one of the big ingredients that's missing when it comes to Made in Africa is that sense that, yes, you're a big business, but you're also part of society. You're a member of society. To what extent do you think that this is, or how important is it, from a business perspective, to integrate that kind of thinking into what you do? Because while it may sound totally reasonable, it isn't always that easy to actually get companies to act in the right way.
It's not easy at all. And actually, I'm not sure we are getting the traction. So we get a few shocks, and we got a shock when the Brits elected to leave the EU, and we all got a bit surprised about that. And then we got another shock when the Americans chose to elect Trump, and we said we have to do something about that. But some months down the line, you see businesses going back to their old way of operating. I give you the example of Unilever, for example. Recently, Kraft Heinz makes a pitch, and then suddenly the shareholders are now beginning to think, well, maybe it's okay for you guys to buy this guy and dismantle the business. So this whole sense of having a purpose and having a view on sustainability, I'm not sure that we are making as much traction. But coming back to an African context, what we have often forgotten is that actually that's not the way of doing business in Africa. If you come back, and I'm not an African, although my forefathers were, clearly. I don't know why you're laughing, so are yours. But it is an African way to care for the village. It's an African way to care for society. And what I would urge African businesses to do is to kind of get back to your core. We cannot exist as a company if the society around us is failing. If you're running a shop in a village, that shop will not survive if the village is failing. And so businesses need to take that purpose-driven approach. And you talk about the Sustainable Development Goal. Me and I'm inseparable from this badge these days, because I think businesses, by and large, large, really needs to embrace a sustainable approach and needs to embrace a purpose-driven approach. What is very disappointing is that whilst most businessmen and women, and I probably include many of you, perhaps not the younger ones, whilst you believe, whilst you know that taking a sustainable approach to your business is the right thing, fewer than half, survey after survey shows that fewer than half CEOs actually are doing anything about it.
It's a nice narrative, and it certainly sounds good, but it's much more difficult to put into practice.
Sorry, finish your question.
No. In terms of Africa, how important is it that this builds traction? Because if you just look at it as go in, get your money, get out, you can make money in Africa. That much is for sure. You can make a lot of money. But what do you leave behind? What is your impact? And what does that mean in the long term for the hundreds of millions of people who are hoping that they're going to get a piece of the pie?
For sure you can make money and get out. But I tend to take this argument to an extreme and say, if you just want me to return on your investment, is it okay if I got engaged in child trafficking? Because I'm guessing that the reason why people do that is because they make a lot of money out of it. And you'll say, no, it's not okay. I say, is it okay if I engage in prostitution? I mean, obviously not me personally. And you're going to say no. And therefore, we have established the principle that there is a line that you're prepared to draw. The only question is, where do you draw that line? And, we have spent a long time, and I'd prepared a speech where I was going to talk about growth and use the analogy of a cell. A cell, the smallest thing you have, actually the smallest thing you have is an atom, but the smallest thing you have is a cell. And many cells, they grow, they become an organ. I lost myself there with that particular analogy. It comes with age. I don't know why you're laughing. What was your question again?
Let me see if I can remember. It was, how important is it to build traction?
Yeah.
And the point you were making is, well, is it okay to sell children?
Yeah,
no,
of
right?
course,
So there is a benchmark.
There is a benchmark. If you believe that running a business just for the short term, then fine, you can actually do some pretty unpleasant things. As a continent, we have always been, I know where my track was going now. As a continent, we've always been about extraction. And whether it's extraction of minerals or extraction of profit. But that doesn't actually take you into being a body. It just leaves you as a cell. As a continent, we have just been a cell. We need to grow from being a cell to being an organ to being a body. And if you don't do that, we will always be talking about, all the statistics we saw earlier today, always be talking about how tiny a contribution the continent makes to the rest of the world. The fact that we're still importing 30% of the food that we eat. For goodness sake, I mean, it's intolerable that in the year 2017, we are still importing the food we eat, when we still have, and I can't remember what the last McKinsey report said, but we have most of the remaining arable land in the world, and therefore we do have to think beyond that.
I'm sort of making an assumption here, but is it fair to say that you don't necessarily share the chairman's perspective that you should not antagonize? Because I'm getting some frustration here in terms of the lack of progress, the lack of urgency in driving some things. Because you're absolutely right. It's extraordinary that in 2017, African countries spend billions of dollars to buy basic sustenance. Do you antagonize? Would you like to antagonize more?
Well, I listened to when the chairman said it the first time, and then when you prodded him, he actually refined it a little bit. You have to work. You have to work with governments, and you can antagonize, and you can really piss them off, or I can't use words like that in Kenya.
I think it's okay. It's Saturday. So.
It's okay. It's Saturday. But you can work, and I think you have to work positively, proactively with government. But government is not the only person you need to work with. We need to work with the business community. We need to work with civil society. What I get fed up with is I get fed up with people looking to government to solve all problems, whilst we sit in our hands. And this morning, I heard Shagan talked about, how do we help small and medium-sized enterprises? And he said, well, I'm a bank. It's not my job. And actually, he was right in the sense that it's not his job, because his board and his shareholders put a fiduciary duty on him. But actually, board and shareholders need to take a different approach to life as well. So I'm not just for pointing fingers at government. I think governments need to do some stuff. They need to sharpen their act. But something I say a lot, and that's that governments, their prime motivation. Anybody knows what the prime motivation of government is? Hands up, anyone? We're trying to make this a little bit interactive. The gentleman with the pink.
To be
Excellent.
Nailed it first time.
He nailed it the first time. The role of any government, whether they be a conservative government or a Labour government or a Democrat, it's to be re-elected. The role of my role as a temporary CEO, because my time will come to an end and someone else, my role is to make sure my business lasts as long as the Unilevers of this world. It's not just to deliver the short-term results. Whereas government, don't rely on government to take care of the citizens. They ain't going to do that. But I have to take care of it, because if I don't take care of it, my company doesn't have a market.
Now, you made the point earlier that a commonly asked question is, why hasn't M-Pesa taken off across Africa? And it's easy to see why that kind of confounds people, because you would think it's the perfect kind of solution for, yeah, okay, there will be differences in economies, but in general, it addresses some core issues that most Africans have to contend with. what would you point to? You said that, well, we were trying to find a problem for a solution. What is your take on this thing about should mobile money be a Pan-African thing? Should we be seeing the kind of sophistication that you're seeing in Kenya, which recently had its first mobile-only government bond, for example, right? Why are we not seeing that kind of sophistication elsewhere? And I mean, do we really need that as a precursor to getting serious about addressing some of these issues you've identified?
Well, let's finish the day the way we started, which is with a little bit of banker bashing.
Always nice.
He's gone home. I think the banking lobby is one of the most powerful lobbies there is. And I think in most countries, and I mean, they tried it in Kenya, but unfortunately, they tried it a little bit too late. In most countries, the banking lobby has been too strong, and the central banks have bowed to that pressure. The Kenyan banks, however, have taken a different approach because having gone through the pain and having been beaten by or apparently beaten by a mobile operator, they've actually figured out that this is not a banking product. Mm-hmm. The product aims to compete with cash. Cash is the enemy. Cash is the thing which depletes value because as soon as you put that cash in a box, it loses value, especially in high inflation economies like Kenya. Cash encourages corruption. Cash encourages evading the payment of tax. So if you get governments and if you get businesses understanding how efficient it can become, we had a report done by KPMG last year, which showed that the value that M-Pesa created for the economy was 4 times the kind of the profit that's made out of it, the number of jobs is created. I think that the biggest problem is that the regulators and the policymakers don't see the real impact of deepening financial inclusion. And deepening financial inclusion, what does that mean? So for you guys in a fancy place here in London, it may not have, sorry, I know some of you are going to be upset by this, but it doesn't apply to everybody. But when you think about deepening financial inclusion, you have to think about a lady called Agnes living in Kibera, who she can't afford to save for insurance. Simply because she might make $2 today, she may not make the next $2 in a couple of days from now. So she can't afford health insurance. And so when her child is sick, actually the odds are that the child will die. And so if you can find a way of dealing with that problem, you will improve delivery of healthcare. You will improve delivery of education. I was speaking to someone earlier today about Eneza. You will improve the yield that a farmer has. And I can keep going on about how deepening financial inclusion can lift the guy on the ground floor. And if policymakers can see that, then I think they'll fix it. But the number of central bank governors that I speak to, and I says, you guys, you're just a hammer. And if you're a hammer, every problem is a nail, so let's just regulate it out of existence.
I mean, it's really come down to that. The central banks have effectively stopped the evolution of mobile money outside of Kenya in a meaningful way.
They have. And I think that then leads to the next part of the question you asked, which was interoperability and making it trans-Africa. Unless the regulators can get there, then interoperability isn't going to make any difference.
Which goes to the heart of the issue, right? Because we talk of the need for intra-African trade. I mean, it's a mantra. It doesn't matter where you go. We need more integration. Yet here's an opportunity to drive integration using mobile technology, proven, demonstrated, proven at scale. And it comes down to not interested, which...
But I think there's some external things which might help, inadvertently. And one of them is our friend, I'm a big admirer of Boris Johnson because he did the cycle lanes. I think it's the only thing he did. But what he's done for Africa, he was in Kenya recently. Anyway, let me leave that one for a second. But I think one of the things that Brexit is doing, and that Trump will do, is it will force Africa to look in on itself. Because suddenly we realize a truth. It is a universal truth. And that is every country has to look after its own interest. And I think that's what Trump is going to do. I mean, he'll fail, of course, but he will attempt to look after his own interests. And it will force us, as a continent, to start to figure out how we work with each other.
Well, fingers crossed that the response is appropriate and commensurate with the need. Now, we have, I think, about 12, 13 minutes or so. Yeah, okay, hands are flying up. Okay, I'm gonna do this democratically. One from the left, one from the middle, one from the right, okay? It's nothing personal.
With some gender diversity.
We're gonna start with the chairman. The chairman wants to ask.
Oh, the chairman.
Yeah, okay.
I didn't see you.
And then in the middle, we'll start with the lady on the left, on the right here. We'll try a second round, and then on the right-hand side, there's a hand up there. So we'll take those three, and then come back for another round. Chairman.
Yes, thank you very much, Bob and my friend.
You'll be surprised, but it's actually Olanrewaju.
Are you sure?
I'm 100% sure. I have my ID on me.
You look more like Boris Johnson.
I know.
Well,
Hey, and to prove it, you don't scatter me.
I take a point here with my friend Bob. Africa has to look inwards, and that is the reality. In a world that is getting more populist, more polarized. But how does this pan in a global economy, a world where the control of the most important resource, apart from ideas, which is money, is totally out of our control? Most of our requirements in terms of development in Africa are actually the big infrastructure businesses. Imagine if someone can give us the roads, can give us the water, can give us, some of this infrastructure that we need. I saw in one of the write-ups that the big businesses are not coming out of Africa. Why would big businesses come out of Africa? If Africa has to look inwards, we'll keep looking, we may not find anything. What do you think?
Okay, thank you very much. Excellent point there. We'll take all three and then get some responses from Bob. Yeah, there was a lady in the second row.
So, first of all, I think you and Shagan, we are lucky here to see two of the best CEOs from Africa in one day. And what I find in common in you is that you have mission above and beyond just making money or run a successful company. So, thank you for that. And I wonder about this government thing, because we bash about the Kenya interest rate control and the Nigeria FX problem, but actually the two policies started with people's interest in heart. Don't want to charge too high and don't want the devaluation to happen. So how can the government, what's your advice to the government to balance the two? Because I do think they do have a really tough job.
Okay, thank you. And then there was one more question on the right behind you. Yeah.
Thank you. My name is Owusu. I work with FTSE companies and governments to manage their supply chain. Quick question is, what do you see as the threats and opportunities of Bitcoin?
Okay. So first, Africa needs to look inward, but it might not find anything.
Yeah, so I don't agree that the money is out of our control. Our money in Africa actually sits in Switzerland and sits here in London and sits everywhere else. And I think what we need to do, and we talked about this a little earlier today, we need to find a way of keeping that money in the country. That's, well, it is to a large extent. And then the second part of the question.
The world's financial system is not within our control. Our money...
That part is true.
Please let me remind you of something. The financial system is a derivative of the Bretton Woods Agreement. There is a particular percentage of your funds that you must keep in a particular approved bank before you can be recognized for holding a particular reserve. That more or less puts everything to our disadvantage. Let's be honest with ourselves.
No, and I think you're true. You're already giving him an applause when he was on the stage. I think it's true, but we don't have to just rely on the financial instruments, right? So a couple of years ago, Obama came to Kenya with the Global Entrepreneurship Summit, and all of the American investors that I spoke to, they said to me, Bob, what is there to invest in? I wanted to do a $10 million investment, and all I'm getting is someone who wants to invest. But you know, all you can find are people who want to invest, you know, maybe $100,000, $200,000, and actually, that's where a lot of the jobs are created. If we can invest in those small companies, 100,000 will get you going. We have a small Spark fund. $500,000 will get you going. And I think we do have that kind of money because that's what's creating the jobs on the continent. And the biggest nightmare that we face as a continent, the thing which I really do lose sleep about is the growing youth unemployment. You know, where are we going to find those jobs? And we don't need the big infrastructure stuff to find the jobs. We need those small things. To the young lady, and I think the other part of the chairman's question, sorry, we shouldn't make just a dialogue between us, but looking inwards, again, I don't disagree with you on the looking inwards. I think we need to look in and look out. And you know, what frustrates me a lot is that you find solution, and I was in Lausanne 2 weeks ago talking with some startup companies, and a lot of these startups only see their solution for Namibia or for Kenya or for Rwanda. And I'm thinking, why don't you see it for San Francisco? In fact, even when we started M-Pesa, why didn't we think about M-Pesa as a worldwide thing? We only thought about it as Kenya. So we do need to look in and to look out. I would not be presumptuous enough to advise governments. I think, you know, they've got a tough job, and you know, let them do their job and let us do our jobs as businesses. And I think if they can do that, then I think we'll be in a good place. And I can think of some African countries, not far from Kenya, that maybe they should just stick with running the country and let the businesses decide whether they want to IPO or not. You know which ones I'm talking about. On Bitcoin, you know, I think it's still, the jury is still out on Bitcoin, to be honest with you. Distributed ledger, I think, definitely has a future. Whether it's going to come in the shape of Bitcoin or not, I am not sure. But it certainly has a lot of merits.
Okay, I think we can do one more round now. So we'll start with the lady on the left-hand side.
Yeah, I'm Obi Amaka, and my question is around sources of funding for SMEs in Africa. What are your views on regulations in Africa that restrict equity and loan-based crowdfunding?
So what was that last bit? That restrict what?
That restrict equity and loan-based crowdfunding.
Okay, equity and loan-based funding. Yeah.
My name is Absalam Wazu. I'm from the African Business Society at the University of Birmingham. I just want to point out that almost all the keynote speakers, it's really close to impossible to talk about sustainable development on the continent without really mentioning corruption. So how do you reconcile, you know, working with government and having integrity in business in that situation? You know, how do you involve the youth that are vibrant and want to avoid these sort of corrupt practices and really have integrity in doing business? How do you incorporate all those factors and get something effective?
How to deal with the C word? That is the question. And then there was a hand towards the back here. Yes, please.
Yes. Hi, my name is Justine Landou. I work for Exeter, which is compliance. Is around compliance, and it's around whether there is actually an appetite for compliance with international AML, ABC, and CTF regulation amongst African businesses.
Again, if you come back to the African approach to doing these things, it's a very collaborative thing. And even in Kenya last month, we did the first government bond using the mobile phone. And so things like Kickstarter, there's absolutely an appetite for that kind of stuff on the continent. And you know, we just need to get a few people who say, you know, let's do this. And we can do it. Because the mobile phone penetration is the greatest penetration. It penetrates even more than water or access to hygiene. And so there is, and if you can get people to save or to fund, you know, $10, $100, I think we can do that. I'm not sure whether I'm answering your question around crowdfunding. You're nodding. Okay, that's good. Working with government and corruption, both the chairman and I actually talked about this issue. Corruption is one of the biggest cancers affecting the continent, as well as other places. I mean, you know, I wouldn't really want to work in Russia or large parts of Eastern Europe, so let's not restrict it to the continent. However, our concern is the continent. And whilst governments and businesses continue to be as rapacious as they are, a recent survey by Pew showed that the people in Nigeria, South Africa, and Kenya believe that the government is only there to serve a few. And so, you know, let me just be a little bit provocative to some of our own politicians, because they're not watching. They're in the middle of electioneering right now. But there was a shocking photo in the newspapers last week of a field with about 10 helicopters. And these are politicians. 10 bloody helicopters. I can tell you how much these helicopters cost because I'm a pilot. And in a country where the Gini coefficient, where the poor are so poor, you're still flouting your helicopter. How did you pay for the helicopter? And so, you know, it takes big companies like mine, relatively big. I mean, you know, we're small in the global scale, but it takes big companies like mine to take a stand and to say, you know what, I'm not going to do business with you. But also to help the smaller companies to stand up to corruption, because it is cancerous, it's unpredictable, and it's no good when investors says, you know, at least we know it's a tax. It's an unpredictable tax which continues to rise. So doing business with government is something which people have to be prepared to say no. And that's not easy. Yeah. It's easier for us, and that's why we do it. And I'm not quite sure I quite understood the question on the compliance. Did you?
I was hoping you got that. Okay, can we perhaps hear the question again? Because there were a lot of acronyms in there.
Oh, sorry. Sorry, that's very bad. I think my question was really to understand whether amongst African businesses there is an appetite to comply with international regulation around anti-money laundering, anti-corruption.
There's no choice. And the German says there's only one way of doing business. There's no African way of doing business. I mean, that's complete rot. There is only one way of doing business. My shareholders sit in Johannesburg, in Manhattan, here in London, in Stockholm, and they will not tolerate me saying that, you know, I'm not going to comply. You have to comply.
Okay, I think we have, what, 2 or 3 minutes? Okay.
The story of Safaricom is one that's inspired many of us. But I remember when it went from, if you want, artisan to where you are now as a sort of, if you want, philanthropist as an organization. And obviously you had an incredible enabling environment. And now you have the firepower from a financial point of view. Are you going to basically open up the purse strings to some of the SMEs around the region in Africa to support them in the way that the Vodafones of the world supported you once upon a time?
All right, thank you.
We might not do it around the region, but we certainly will do it within Kenya. I mean, there might come a time when we've looked after, you know, our own local people and then move across into places like Rwanda. I'm a big fan of Rwanda, and I think that there's a visionary leadership there which really helps companies like ours to work well.
Thank you.
Okay, I think we have to wrap up. Now, one more. Okay.
Thank you very much. My name is Alim Abubakri. We at London Business School, and most of the audience are students and aspiring leaders.
I thought he was going to say most of the audience are Nigerian.
So basically what I wanted to address is, can you talk about perhaps the biggest challenge you faced or failure you faced in Kenya, and how you addressed it, and what did you learn from the experience? Thank you.
Thank you.
You want to take one last one and then we can wrap it?
All right, sure. Yeah. Might as well. We'll throw it in.
My name is Raphael Annie. My question was about the issue you said you were having with central bank governors. Don't you think that vertical integration with other sectors might be a way to circumvent that? Like what you're doing with solar energy? Can't that be replicated in other sectors?
Yeah, okay, so 2 quick answers. I mean, the biggest challenge is corruption. And the most frustrating challenge is corruption. You know, I grew up here. And so when I got to Africa, I went via Japan, which was like super clean.
Not much corruption there.
Well,
at least not financial.
The corruption is at a different level. But you know, the kind of the corruption which starts from the guy and the watchman all the way through. So that's the biggest challenge, and I'm not sure it's getting any better. A fact, right? And to your question, yeah, I mean, we're trying to integrate in everything. But people keep saying, you know, you're getting too big and we need to cut your legs off. Mainly stupid people say that. Well, you have to be stupid. I mean, how can you want to cut the legs off a $7 billion company when you've got Amazons and you've got Facebooks and you've got everything else? So we're trying to integrate ourselves into delivering healthcare solutions, education solutions, agriculture. Agriculture is a big deal for us. We're only just scratching the surface. because we think that with the telephone network, with the financial services, and with the other bits and pieces that we're doing, we're now looking at e-commerce, for example, then we think we can make a big difference. And we, wrap it up by saying that because we start with purpose, we say we want to transform lives, whether it's the lives of a small, medium-sized enterprise or a mama mboga, the woman selling on the side of the street. We want to transform their lives, and if we're not going to do that, then we don't follow a particular product. And if we're going to transform lives, then we have to integrate, and we have to become a platform, if you like. Thank you very much. Thank you.